City Council of the City of Fredericksburg for August 28, 2018. We will be led in invocation this evening by Councilor Charlie Fry, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please stand if you may.
Lord, thank you for this day, and I'm asking that you would graciously grant us the wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues, a sense of welfare and true needs of our people, the ability to work together in harmony even when there's an honest disagreement. I pray for the agenda set before us today. Please give us assurance of what will please you and what will benefit those who live and work in the city. It is in your most blessed name I pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have a presentation this evening from the American Heart Association with their exciting plans. I'll call Chief Eddie Allen forward, and any other folks you have with you that you wish to recognize.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to come before for you tonight to talk about the American Heart Association Heart Walk, as well as the city's automated external defibrillation program, or commonly known as the AED program. There are currently 50 AEDs throughout the city at any given time in the city's program. Currently, all city employees are CPR and AED certified. We continue to focus our efforts to make AEDs available throughout the city, where your fire and EMS apparatus carry life packs, your city police cars, your sheriff cruisers, as well as fire and EMS support vehicles, and in your city buildings and city schools, there are AEDs located throughout. We are looking at 4 new initiatives in the coming year. One, we're currently working with the Main Street program to identify some businesses downtown that will allow us to put AEDs in those businesses. Also, we're working with the school system to increase the number of AEDs in the school and to update those AEDs. And we have currently already placed 2 new AEDs in James Monroe High School. We're also wanting to increase the number of AEDs that we currently have in city buildings. As an example, City Hall here, we have 1 AED on the first floor, so we would like to increase that number to 2 by putting 1 up on the second floor. In the Executive Plaza, we currently have 1 on the main floor, and we would like to increase the number in that by 2 extra on the 3rd and the 7th floors. Also, we would like to pursue the Pulse Point app program. That program is made by the Heart Association. It allows us to enter all the AEDs throughout the city into a program, and it also allows the citizens to download a free app on their cell phone. If there is a need for CPR or AED emergency, then those individuals that have the app will receive notification, and also it will let the first responder or the citizen know where the AEDs are located throughout the city. So I would imagine one of your questions is, how are we going to fund this? We are looking to fund this through grants, just like we have done in the past. The AEDs that we currently have throughout the city, in the police cruisers, in the sheriff's vehicles, as well as in the city hall and the city buildings, has been funded through grants through the Office of EMS. So we will be going back again through the Office of EMS, applying for grants, and also pursuing other healthcare sources to help fund these initiatives that we are trying to bring to the city and to increase the number of AEDs that we have located throughout the city. Are there any questions?
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Eddie, what's the cost for one of these?
Currently, the cost, and it depends on, right now, we are using the Philip Heart Start, which is roughly about $1,600. We found a source recently where that we have been able to acquire some at $700. So we were able to increase the number of AEDs in the police cars by going to this source. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Allen? Counselor Devine?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you address the use of them? How often have they been used, deployed through the police or through the
well,
city?
the number, unfortunately, I apologize, I can get that to you, the number of responses. But anytime there is a report of a heart attack, a stoppage of breathing, a anaphylactic shock where a reaction to something, the police department responds as well as fire and EMS, and of course they carry the AEDs as well. But I can get that good number for you. We attempted to get it in between the 4 different agencies. We weren't able to get all of the numbers, but I'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you. We actually practiced today at school, so we were using our AEDs and
Yeah.
EpiPens and all that good stuff. So, thanks.
Any other questions? Well, I thank you.
Okay, at this time, I would like to introduce Sarah Pearson, who is the director of the American Heart Association, to talk to you about the Heart Walk.
Good.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I want to do a brief segue about the AEDs. When we raise money and talk about national health organizations like the American Heart Association, many people say, well, what in the world, we're a local community, I don't want the money going out. The AEDs and the hands-only CPR on the short dummy that we've all seen, this came from research just 5 years ago that there were way too many out-of-hospital deaths from cardiac arrest and heart attack. So the researchers said, well, what in the world would help? And they shortened the size of the dummy, from the long that you had to give it the breaths and you had to count, and it was very scary, and somebody got sued for breaking a rib. They said, we can't do that anymore, let's shorten the dummy. And then they, perfected the AEDs so that you can't hurt anyone with it. It guides you through it. You cannot kill anyone with the electrical shock. So that's a commercial break for what Eddie's asking for, because it's really what this research does. It brings it right to life and right to the street, right here in Fredericksburg. So September 15th is our Heart Walk, and I put some paraphernalia at all of your places. We'd give anything to have you there. I already have a City of Fredericksburg company for you to register under, so thank you for considering that. It's the most generous community I've ever lived in. It's a joy and a privilege to work with the American Heart Association here. So I brought 3 of my favorite volunteers to talk to you about what they do for us and why it matters. So thanks again so much. It would be helpful if I told you who they were. Bev Newland is really my right hand in this whole campaign. She started a Healthy for Good program for underserved communities. We're starting a monthly health and wellness program at the Salvation Army in September. We just did one for an entire year at the YMCA with speakers from the hospital. It's a big partnership, and the Newlands made that possible. We're just continuing to find new ways to educate the public on how in the world to be healthier, how to get healthier, and how to eat better. As Bob Vranian says, we are a platform for community health. And truly, Bev and Don Newland have put legs on that idea with Healthy for Good. Bev?
I'm a native. I was born here in Fredericksburg and have spent most of my adult life here in this community. I was first introduced to the heart issues when I was 5 years old. I came home one afternoon. My mother was sitting in a chair crying. My father was lying on a sofa. He was ashen white with his hands crossed over his chest. We were waiting for the rescue squad to come and take him to the hospital. In those days, One was kept in the hospital for weeks at a time, if you can believe it. And the only treatment he had, other than the doctors checking his pulse and his heart rate, was this little white pill called nitroglycerin. And for the rest of his life and the rest of my life with him, I always knew something was up when that little bottle came out and that little pill went under his tongue. But without all the modern stuff we have today, he changed his mind and way of living and lived another 30 years. I was there the 2 days before he was supposed to have a cardiac stimulator put in. He had a really bad episode, and on Father's Day, they disconnected him and he passed away. A Father's Day 15 years later, I had a grandson born on Father's Day. He had to be rushed from a hospital in Blacksburg to the, to Duke Medical Center, and had open heart surgery when he was 2 days old. These procedures were developed through research with the American Heart Association. I have a brother who has had open heart surgery, and then he had to have stents put in. And recently he had a new procedure done where they replaced his aortic valve by injecting it through the aorta. It was laparoscopically, a new valve was put into place, which is amazing that could be done. Now I have a member of my family who suffers from post-traumatic stress syndrome due to some instances of things that he had in the military. And one of the new research projects being done by the American Heart Association is how does extreme stress affect the heart? And they're working on this research now. How do we help these people? And we can thank the American Heart Association for all of this research that's coming back individual by individual to our community. And I thank you.
Thank you, Bev.
My name is Scott, and I thought tonight would be a great opportunity to tell a little story for you. About a dozen years or so ago, I ran into an old high school acquaintance. We'll call him John. John was the bad kid. He was the troublemaker. He was the kid covered in tattoos. He was dealing, and we knew he was, but that's who he was. So again, he was an acquaintance. I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but I knew him. And he was absolutely that kid who you knew sometime in his life story, incarceration was going to be there, I'm afraid to say. You knew he was that guy. Well, when I ran into him, I was curious. And I said, how have you been? What have you been up to? He said, well, Scotty, I get people high. I thought, wow, that's deep and honest. And he said, yeah, I sell a daily drug. It improves people's courage and their energy and their ability to forget challenges that they deal with. I thought, wow, hallucinogens? I didn't want to ask, but I was absolutely curious. But then he went into it further, and he says, his words, I'm sorry, I've got it written here. I help people overcome the stresses of life, financial pressures, the stresses of family. I give people energy to get more done on a daily basis. And now I'm thinking, it's deep. What is this? You could see the look on my face, I'm sure, because he immediately said, Scotty, no, it's not what you think. I bought a gym. Not at all the answer I thought he was going to say. He said, when I cleaned up, he was honest again, he said, when I cleaned up, I found the Church of Health and Fitness. I found clarity, I found purpose, I found self-discipline, and I found myself. I wanted to give that to other people. And so I bought a health club, and now I give that to people on a daily basis. Along with that, I lowered my health insurance premiums. I helped myself financially. Didn't mean to. It just happened. Most importantly, he said I found confidence. and that's something that I think a lot of people lack. And I thought, wow, there's a hell of a lesson in this. Sorry to say, there's a great lesson in this. I know for a fact that 80% of our population does not exercise. They don't do anything healthy. Imagine how well we could take care of those that matter to us if we would take care of ourselves first. I think it's a great lesson there. The American Heart Association, they get that, and that's why I want to be involved in what they do. Their message is terrific, and they understand all the lessons that John taught me. That's all I want to say. Now I'm going to be followed by Dr. Bob Vranian. For the last 40 plus years, he's been a cardiologist here. He's been serving Fredericksburg. I think you guys all know who he is.
Thank you, Scott.
Madam Mayor, City Council members, Eddie, thank you for asking us to speak tonight. I'm going to be very brief. I'm here because we're all members of the same team. We want a better life for our people in Fredericksburg and in the Fredericksburg area. You devote your time to that. I devote my days and nights to that. I came here 40 years ago, was raised in West Point, Virginia, and I loved a small town, and this was the closest thing to a small town that could support a cardiologist. And I could see that it was going to be a growth area. It already was, but being on the Mississippi River, that is I-95 with the traffic, being an ideal location, 40 miles, 50 miles from two centers, and still maintaining what is the most beautiful thing, the fabric of a community, a true, I would say, progressive Southern community that is not afraid to look at what happened in the past, but also looks forward to following ideals for all in the future. And there's no freedom, no loss of freedom that is any greater than the loss of health. And I view myself over the years, and I've not told many people this, as a freedom fighter to maintain people's health. And the American Heart Association serves, as Sarah said, particularly in this town with her vigorous and skillful help, as a platform to bring the news and bring advice and bring professionals together. She's a great money raiser, I'll tell you that. And she also has a vision for the community. And I think the reason that we were invited here tonight was to basically to get your endorsement to understand what's going on. And the way I look at it, and I'm not alone, the most important thing that we can do to help people is to make the best of their own lifestyle and their own genetics. And right now, that's not being done. We have other issues, narcotics epidemic, we have the obesity epidemic, which is directly related to excess carbohydrate intake and people who have a tendency toward insulin resistance, that is a tendency toward saying, I have enough fat stored on board, I don't need it anymore, I'm going to close the pores to let sugar into the cells. Insulin is secreted from messages from the brain if the sugar goes up a little bit. The only tissue that's truly insulin resistant is muscle tissue, and the rest of the body therefore gets overfed. So you see this gradual increase in body weight, particularly around the gut. You see a gradual increase in blood pressure because the brain gets adrenaline secreted because it has to get rid of energy. It doesn't store energy. So you have an increase in blood pressure, increase in arrhythmias. The liver gets fatter. It's the biggest cause of cirrhosis we have today in the United States because of insulin resistance. And then it secretes more small cholesterol-carrying particles. And those particles get on the walls of the vessels. They become oxidized like iron turns to rust. White blood cells swallow them, see them as a foreign body, burr under the lining of the vessels, and over years, garbage piles of digested cholesterol particles and white blood cells occur. If they fester like a boil on acne and come to a head, they can erode out and rupture and end up, the pus that goes out of that called gruel will stick and occlude blood vessels, and that's what causes 90% of nonviolent sudden deaths. That's what causes heart attacks and strokes. And that's what is directly related to 40 to 45% of the deaths in the United States. All of that is potentially preventable, and it's not anybody's fault. It's something that we should teach, learn. Lifestyle is a great part of it. And having the American Heart Association Heart Walks brings all types of people together. It focuses them for a day on a good cause, and I think reflects the integrity for the goodwill of all in this community. So I thank you for letting us talk tonight, and I hope my little physiology lesson, realizing that the only tissue that's really insulin resistant is muscle tissue, and that's why everything else goes haywire, and that's why when you walk around Walmart, you see these very large people with larger children. Okay, so we have to turn that tide, and we'll reduce the cost of medical care and have a more prosperous and happy community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faranian. We appreciate your being with us tonight and all the good work that the American Heart Association does here in the community. We have one public hearing tonight. Madam Clerk, would you please read item 5A?
Approving the preliminary subdivision plat for Valley Run, approximately 7.6 acres of single-family attached development with associated access to infrastructure improvements.
Thank you. I will call upon Ms. Sherman.
Thank you. My presentation tonight will frame the different types of requests before City Council with regard to the proposed Valley Run subdivision. I will provide an overview of the preliminary subdivision plat application, its two associated exception requests, and offer recommended actions on each. The main request is the approval of a preliminary subdivision plat application to create 64 new townhouse lots. Consideration of a preliminary subdivision plat application is in large part a ministerial matter, in that if the application meets all applicable regulations, the application should be approved. The Valley Run application includes two exception requests for lot frontage and alley width. Being upfront, it doesn't meet those two current applicable requirements. Exceptions to deviate from applicable regulations are discretionary and should be considered in the context of whether or not the exception is in the best interest of the public. Council can weigh the pros and cons of each request and consider such items as the comprehensive plan guidance and purpose statements in the zoning ordinance when taking action to grant or deny an exception. In this case, if council chooses to deny the exception requests, the overall preliminary subdivision plat application would therefore not comply with all applicable regulations and therefore should also be denied. If council finds that approval of the exception requests is in the best interest of the public, then it should also find the overall preliminary subdivision plat in compliance and take action to approve it. Originally, the staff report noted that pursuant to the Code of Virginia, City Council was required to take action on these items tonight. The applicant has granted earlier today, the applicant granted an exception to provide additional time to address any concerns that council or the public may raise tonight and asked that City Council not take action until its September 25th meeting. Now that we've laid the groundwork, let's talk about the proposed project. The 7.6 acre site is located in a generally commercial area on the west side of Route 1, south of Dunning Mills Road. It is zoned commercial highway, which allows for up to 71 townhouses on this site by right. If approved, the proposed neighborhood could support the existing commercial uses and complement the Devonshire and Confederate Ridge neighborhoods located on the east side of Route 1. Direct access from Route 1 and Dunning Mills Road will be provided by two private streets, Valley Run Drive and Emerson Lane. The streets establish an internal block pattern and diversify traffic options on Route 1, thereby reducing vehicle trips at the intersection of Route 1, Dunning Mills Road, and Confederate Boulevard. The private streets shown here in gray will be constructed with curb and gutter, on-street parking, street lights, and street trees. A network of alleys also shown in gray will provide primary access to lots 13 through 41, secondary access to lots 1 through 12, and 42 through 64, parking bays, and future access to adjacent properties. Sidewalks will be extended along the frontages of Route 1 and Dunning Mills Road. The proposed design exceeds the city's requirements to provide a minimum of 109 parking spaces with the availability of 128 driveway spaces and 60 on-street and alley parking spaces for a total of 188 parking spaces provided. Additionally, each home will have a 2-car garage, providing the opportunity for up to a total of 316 parking spaces, depending on how the residents utilize their garages. 2.39 acres of land, or 31% of the site, will be dedicated to the homeowners association as an open space set-aside, exceeding the minimum 25% required. The open space is designated for recreational uses, gathering areas, as well as the preservation of natural areas and the installation of buffers. As noted, the application includes 2 exception requests, which can be granted at the discretion of City Council in unusual situations or when strict adherence to regulations would result in substantial injustice or hardship. In working with the developer and in formulating staff's recommendations, we looked for unique opportunities or unusual situations to provide or improve the overall design and further the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. The first exception request relates to lot frontage requirements for lots 13 through 41. Section 72-51.3A requires each lot in the CH zoning district to front on a public street, a private street, or a driveway. As proposed, lots 13 through 41 would front instead on common areas or facing other adjacent residential lots with future common area easements. Again, instead of turning outward, meeting the code requirements, with front doors facing toward adjacent commercial properties, the request is to grant an exception to allow the units within the neighborhood to face each other. The design permits the townhouses, again, to face each other over common areas for use by the neighborhood. It creates a functional community gathering place with a unique and distinctive neighborhood character. These are items specifically identified in Goals 1, 2, and 3 for residential neighborhoods and housing in Chapter 7 of the Comprehensive Plan. The second exception request relates to reducing the minimum width of alleys that provide secondary access to lots 1 through 8 and 42 through 62. Section 72-52.3D requires alleys to have a minimum width of 24 feet unless the Virginia statewide fire prevention code requires wider access. Valley Run proposes to construct alleys and streets of at least 24 feet in width where they serve as primary access to lots and provides sufficient access for public and private vehicles and for public safety and firefighting equipment. All elements of the statewide fire prevention code are being addressed with the primary accesses on streets and alleys. But for alleys providing secondary or rear access to lots, Valley Run requests an exception to allow for a reduction in alley width to only 20 feet, similar to the design in recently approved projects like Hampton's Phase 2 and the Highlander project in downtown. The reduction in alley width is necessary to provide to minimize overall pavement in the alley, addressing comprehensive plan environmental goals, reducing point source pollution and runoff, and to provide for complete streets, including on-street parking, street trees, street lights, and sidewalks as identified in the neighborhood goals and housing. The geometric design of the lot as it is today has limited space along Emerson Lane, that full depth there, and then parallel to Valley Run Drive to accommodate for a complete street, meeting the minimum lot sizes, and then also to provide these secondary alleys. The exception would allow for all of those things to be addressed. Another example would be that specifically behind lots 42 through 51, a reduction in that alley allows for the creation of on-street parking along Emerson Lane, which would not otherwise be required by the code. This is a benefit to the community. The Planning Commission reviewed the application at its meeting on August 8th. Following discussion about parking, sidewalks, and open space, the Commission took action on a vote of 6-0 to recommend approval of the application and associated exception requests. Staff recommends approval of all of the items as well, except for tonight, staff recommends that City Council take public comment and defer action on the application until its meeting on September 25th. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from Ms. Sherman? Councilor Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, by right projects, so we'll swing over that. I found it interesting in the point you made, Marnie, on both the exception issues, that you rattled down a list of things about how great it is to allow this to have happen, which fundamentally brings forth the question, then why is it an exception? Why are we not approving it? I mean, I've seen a lot of neighborhoods where houses face each other and people come out and see each other every morning, and I agree with you, it's a great and wonderful thing. So why is an exception there? And as you noted, from a transportation standpoint and safety standpoint, all these buildings are accessible by fire and police, all the width are there, and we're basically talking again about something that's going in and around that frankly is a secondary issue to gain access. And you pointed out, by doing this, we're now allowing for street trees and nice things and everything else that we love to see in these type of developments. So again, why are these both in these cases exceptions?
Ms. Sherman?
Good question. And soon you will see the proposal in Article 5 to make those changes. Actually, in September, you will be asked to initiate potential text amendments to address those things and to make them commonplace.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Withers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, Ms. Sherman, thank you for meeting with me earlier today and going over this. As you knew, I had some concerns. Would you put the slide back up showing the subdivision with the open space? There you go. I know there's nothing we can do about this, but it seems to me it's a shame that about 90% of the open space is in areas that's probably not really accessible due to slopes and wetlands, and the fact that they're in RPA areas, and of course some of the other open space is going to be areas in between the dwellings. Do you have another slide with that, or is that just the one that?
This one?
There you go. So, if I own one of these townhouses, that means that there's an easement across my front yard that basically allows everyone in the subdivision to use it. Is that basically the concept?
That's what's proposed, yes,
Okay.
sir.
You know, I struggle with that. I think my main concern is, and I know this is beyond, I mean, our ordinance allows this, and so it's not an arguable point really, is the fact that there's very little space. You know, there are going to be some children here. I don't know where they go. I don't know where they play. They play in the streets, or they play in the front of their houses, and that's about it. Again, I know that's not an arguable point, but I think it is something that hopefully council will look at going down the road to try to improve a slight plan. Certainly, it wouldn't apply to this subdivision, but I think we need to set out guidelines that will help our developers and help our staff come up with something that's more livable, quite frankly, than this. So. It's going to be hard for me to vote. Well, I'm not going to go down that road, but we're going to put this off to until next week, and so hopefully we'll work together. And I just don't. I don't see a whole lot of improvements. And I know that you've worked hard to make it a better subdivision, and I appreciate that. And I know these folks' record has been good. I was completely wrong on a project they did a couple of years ago. After seeing it, congratulations. I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong about a project. That turned out quite well. So, you know, I've got concerns. I guess what complicates this for me is that we've, and again, this is allowable. I mean, we've got very little commercial highway land left in the city of Fredericksburg, and we use it for townhouses. Again, it's an allowable use, so it's not a good argument to have, but I think that's something that maybe council needs to look at going further. If I said too much, Madam Attorney?
May I make a point of clarification?
Yes, you may.
I mean, I have heard the plat now referred to as by right and nothing we can do, but the plat as submitted is not permitted under the subdivision regulations. It requires the granting of exceptions in order to gain that approval. So
Yeah.
it's not a by right subdivision. It is a use that's permitted by our ordinance. It's a use that's permitted in this zoning district, but the plat as submitted is not by right. Council may approve it, but council is not required to approve it, and that takes it out of the usual subdivision review process.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I misspoke. I think-
Thank you for that clarification.
I think what I should have said and what I intended to infer that was that the amount of units are certainly allowed by right, and of course the layout, I think probably, other than the two exceptions, is pretty much allowed by right. So thank you for that clarification. And thank you, as always, the web guys for doing work in the city. So I'll let it go with that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any other counselor wish to ask Ms. Sherman anything? Is the applicant present? Would the applicant like to speak?
Good evening. My name is Dan Webb. I'm with Webb & Associates, the engineer, but also my brother Chad and I are the property owners. And this is our second project that we're developing in the city. We felt like we did a good job on the first project at Governor's Road. It's turned out nice, and we finally just got off bond, and it's complete. We picked this project because it was by right. We felt like we could make a great infill project. I understand it does need a couple of exceptions. Those were developed through the course of working with staff over the past 5 or 6 months, and we determined that we could get really a better product if we could, ask and receive those exceptions. The alleys, again, are secondary. We are asking or requesting to go from 24 to 20 feet. But if we were to eliminate the on-street parking, we could certainly accommodate that. But we felt like the on-street parking probably met the needs of the city and the residents a little bit more than having the additional 4 feet in the alleys on the few lots. And then we did feel like we could create a very unique product with the two townhomes facing a mews. I understand that some of that mews and area that we're going to put an easement on happens to be on individual lots. But we do feel like it creates a good product and a product that we feel like our residents would be very happy with. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, we are happy with the, a deferral until the 25th of September, where we can try to sit down with any one of you that want to sit down, and we can see if we can make the project even better. We'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Councilor Fry?
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. Upon approval on the what if and this project happens, was there ever any consideration about like Fred bus stops and anything of that nature along with your project? Or
We didn't, but I think that's a great sales point. I mean, I think that's something that would really help us to look into. But no, as part of the subdivision process, we had not considered that yet, but I think that's something that we certainly should look into. I've had success working with Fred in the past on other projects, and be glad to look into that.
Yeah, because I can't really ask for a Fred bus stop at any project, but I'm just saying for any developer, to consider the needs of the folks in the city, especially when you're bringing folks to the city. If it's not this project, any project, it's good to see things that that make sense. Because even at Fred bus stop, in general, could be used as the school bus stop, which will have some shelter. If you notice here lately, been a lot of sheltered Fred bus stops. So I'm just throwing it out there in general. You don't have to take it directly to you. It's more of a general developer, because everything looks great when it's presented, and it's like, whoa, you just missed that, and it doesn't happen. And then if it goes through the Fred process, it could be a year. The next fiscal year, so on and so forth. But if folks will come through with some of these basics on projects, it will make it, make a lot of sense. But thank you for that. I remember to reflect a little bit, like Mr. Withers did, the Governor's Road project. it got a little crazy. I remember sitting in here, and there was I took a lot of phone calls the next morning on that project from the neighbors, with a lot of concerns, and but overall, I remember that project like it was yesterday because it was like hotels or townhouses, and that's what I was looking at. But I would say thank you for your interest in the city, and it was a good project, and I'd like to see what this one comes up to be in the end. I really have no opinion on it at this moment, but I just wanted to throw that out there about any project for any developer, whoever's listening. Just consider some of those things that make it better for folks. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. Vice Mayor Withers.
Yeah, I'd like one more question. Would you put the subdivision plat back up, please? Mr. Webb, are there any buffers or any landscaping that shield these townhouses from the used car lot on the south and the filling station on the north?
No, the only buffer that we have is along Route 1.
Yeah, so in other
the
words.
reason, and I can tell you the reason, we work with staff and we have alleys located next to those adjacent properties. And there's a note on the preliminary plat, but there is an encouragement for them to be able to access those alleys in the future. So that as those properties redevelop, especially like the used car lot, they would have access to those alleys, and we can kind of bring that in as one project, and they have the ability. We've met with all of the adjacent property owners, and they've all been, very happy with what we have done. So that was the thought there. We had buffers at one point. Again, we've gone through a number of iterations, and really where we ended up was having those alleys where they're accessible to the adjacent.
So we might be looking at more townhouses where the used car lot is? Is that what you're saying?
There has been no indication, and we certainly don't have any plans with that.
I would be surprised if commercial use would want to access your driveways, but I think those are the kind of issues that we're facing that has nothing to do with this project.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webb.
Sure.
Again, thank you for your work in the city.
No, we enjoy working in the city. And staff is great to work with, and we enjoy working with you all.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilor Duffy.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a question about maybe moving forward that we could have a sense of what the back of those townhouses might look like. Do you have anything like that in a plan for those townhouses that face each other, of what the back would look like? Because that's what you would see.
I mean, I have not provided any architectures.
Right.
We can certainly do that, but
Well-
you're saying the rear where the garage spaces are?
Right.
What they would look like?
Right.
Yeah, we can certainly provide you something.
Okay.
Dan, is it fair to say that it would resemble the rear portion of what you see at Governor's Row with a garage on the ground level and a deck, a 200 square foot deck above the driveway,
Yes.
Okay.
and then
And,
another level above that?
I've read in the notes about a elimination of a utility strip on Emerson Lane. I'd be curious to know, to what extent that detracts from the visual appeal of a place to scoot the trees back. I don't know.
I mean, we obviously don't feel like it's going to be
Right.
detrimental to the impact. We think we can deliver a wonderful product with the trees being, back behind the sidewalk in that one small area. I think there are a number of places in the city where you may see some of that, but
Okay. Well, obviously downtown and more urban areas.
yes.
And I do appreciate Mr. Withers' comments. I mean, I don't think the exceptions they're asking for are related to those concerns, but they are concerns we have. But I appreciate you giving us some time and giving the public time to think about this and get back to us. But thank you for your work in the city. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more questions for the applicant, I will open, this is a public hearing, and if there is any member of the public here tonight who would like to speak to this matter, you may come forward, give your name and home address, and you have 5 minutes to make comments.
This is one of my favorite subjects, Harriet Road, 1238 Bryn Street, and that is community developments. I didn't hear anything about a homeowners association. I heard them refer to a community area, but I didn't know whether that was to include a clubhouse for a homeowners association, and I don't know whether that's required in this city or state, but I would like to know. Garage versus parking areas. Why say you've got so many two-car garages when you turn around and say, well, it depends on how the homeowners use it? How many of you have ever driven by garages that are not used at all? The homeowner parks their car on their driveway and the rest of them go out on the street. And I know some cities make it a requirement. If you have a garage, you can put as much storage in there as you want, as long as a car can be parked in that garage. And I think that's something the city needs to look at. All right, I mentioned the community area versus the homeowners association. I don't know whether you all require that or not. Sidewalks run into alleys and streets. And I think it was Councilman Withers who brought up the fact that there are going to be children living in this area. So you're going to send the children off the sidewalks into the alleys and into the streets. They have two streets, public streets, and the rest of them are alleys. That's something I don't like. I think children should be protected from cars backing out of driveways, garages, etc. I think that needs to be looked at. The bus shelter, I think, is a very good idea. And I don't think that's such an expense that any development couldn't afford to put into there, especially when they're saying they're trying to develop a better product. That's one thing you can do, develop a better product. And the landscaping, I agree again with Councilman Withers, 100%. This business of plopping something down to business or commercial and then not requiring some sort of shield for the homeowners. If it happens again, you'll see me again. I just think this is something, again, the cities are doing. They're saying, okay, whether you are commercial, industrial, or a home owners, a planned development, you have to have some sort of landscaping plan to go along with it. And they also require, some cities require a sidewalk plan that's designed to protect the people who either go into the commercial, the industrial, or the homes. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right, we are going to hold this public hearing open because the extension has been requested or granted to the city by the applicant, so we will keep the public hearing open so that when it comes back to us, it will still be a public hearing. Did you have a question, Councilor
Well, yeah,
Kelly?
Madam
I
Mayor,
was going to ask either the applicant or Ms. Sherman to answer the
Yeah, that's what I was
homeowner's
asking, to
question.
make sure we were going to allow the applicant to respond. I'm sorry.
We do allow an applicant to respond to any questions that arise during comments that they would like to answer. And either the applicant or and Ms. Sherman can back you up on the HOA question.
Yeah, the question was, whether there's going to be an HOA, and absolutely there will be. There are a number of common areas and stormwater management and all of those things that we would have to create an HOA to maintain. But at this point, we do not plan on a clubhouse. That was mentioned. The other item that was mentioned was parking. We are required to have 109 parking spaces, off-street parking, well, all off and on-street. And what we are providing is 188. That the way we tally that, we're two driveway spaces, and then the on-street parallel parking spaces, and then the other off-street parking areas. We did not include in our calculation the garage parking spaces. So when you add those in, we'll have, 2 more per unit for that. So I think we're adequately parked. One thing I do feel like we did on Governor's Road was we have more than adequate parking. We're personally out there quite a bit, trying to finish things up, and we felt like, we didn't have a parking issue there. Sidewalks, we are proposing sidewalks that are running along all of the streets, the private streets. We are not proposing any alleys proposing sidewalks along any alleys. although we are proposing sidewalks in front of the units that are facing one another. So I don't know that we're dumping any children or having children walk along sidewalks that are going to be going right along where driveways and people are backing out. Bus shelter, again, I think that's a great idea. You know, we are not proposing that at this point, but I think it's something certainly worth looking into. And then the buffer, you know, we certainly want to look at buffering. At Governor's Road, one thing that we did is we did install a fence along the rear that was between our property and the commercial. And I think that provided a great buffer. It really helped our sales. And I would envision in us doing that, or at least around the Sunoco station, the gas station. And we did talk to the owner of Dunning Mills, and you know, we talked about putting more than likely a fence and landscaping along their boundary as well, just so they felt like it would be a good thing for them. So they didn't get complaints maybe with their customers walking through our development. So there are some things that we're looking at, but we just had not committed to those on a preliminary plat at this point.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Webb.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And as I explained before, this public hearing will remain open until the September 25th meeting?
Right. I imagine the public hearing is in recess until you reopen it essentially on September 25th. That's your September 25th
Okay.
meeting.
So the proper terminology is in recess.
And it's
And we
continued.
all know about I'll get you at recess. All righty. Thank you very much. We appreciate Mr. Webb's, the two of you. We appreciate very much your investment in the city and your willingness to work with the city to produce a good product for our citizens. I would like to recognize Officers Rivers and Norman, and thank you for being here this evening. We have no one signed up to speak for our open mic comments from the public tonight. So we will proceed to the council agenda. I would like to add one item, 7A, Home Incorporated. Would anyone else like to add anything? Councilor Fry?
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. I'd like to add two separate items. The first one is Caroline Street, 25 miles an hour.
Okay.
And thank you. And the second one is French John's Wharf, D Baptist. French John's Wharf.
Okay, D Baptiste. Okay. Anyone else?
Madam Mayor,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add, I'll just call it planning.
Planning. A planning item. Okay. Well, very briefly, I had the honor today to attend the 20th year celebration of Housing Opportunities Made Economical Incorporated, a fine not-for-profit local group supported by many businesses and organizations, and our city planning department acts as a partner with them, who have provided accessible and affordable housing for many citizens and who continue to do so. And I proclaim today Home Inc. Day in Fredericksburg and recognize them for their 20th year. Items 7B and 7C are yours, Councilor Fry.
Thank you. Item 7B, 25 mile an hour speed limit request. What I want to do is, with this, is have Mr. Baruti maybe just take a few notes of this, of what I'm saying. And I would like for this request for the 25 mile an hour extension request for everybody who doesn't know, when you come down Caroline Street and when you're coming up by the Silk Mill area, it's 25 miles an hour through the residential area there, and then as a continuation in your traffic flow in the right lane going to Old Mill Park, the speed limit is 35 miles an hour from that whole way through. And there have been some requests by myself and by the Rising Sun Neighborhood Association, and a friend of mine named Mayor Greenlaw as well. But there have been some requests, and some I would say more or less studies from the city. Doing those requests about the speeding, there has been a lot, so I'm not here to pick on staff or public works or anybody. They did, I will state this, they did get the first, on Caroline Street was the first initial digital speed sign that we got in the city. It was almost like a trial run that they benefited from on that one. And we're waiting on data from that to see what the speed actually is coming through there now as our police department will gather the data from the actual sign itself. So that could be something that could be updated in the review process. But to get to the point of what I'm trying to say, I would just, my request for you, Mr. Baruti, is to have I want to get the name right, our Internal Transportation Review Committee. Is that what it is? All right. Okay. I would like to make a request for them, for the internal committee to take another look at this request. And that way we can give some more solid information back to the neighbors and the folks that are requesting it, myself included. But I just, like I say, just as a continuation to see what can be done for the future. And for the record, I have spent a lot of time with staff, and staff has spent a lot of time on it as well. I drank a lot of coffee on this one, trying to get something done. But more or less, when you come down, there are no houses in between that area where it separates. There are no houses there, but when you get closer to Old Mill Park, you have a set of townhouses, and then you have the Mills building down there. And my initial thought was, over time, I know some projects have been coming. Some talk have been going on a long time about the Silk Mill area being redeveloped and some residential. And I thought something would surface by now, but it hasn't. And during that time, even with Mr. Whelan, I spoke to him. Him and I had coffee about the same situation. And my initial goal back then was if a project came from Mr. Whelan that had a residential component, then we would try it again. But like I say, just as an internal review, that's my simple request in a long, drawn-out manner, Mr. Baruti. So thank you for that. And that's it for that item.
Mr. Baruti?
Madam Mayor, we're happy to study that quarter further and report back to council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. And the next item is 7C, and it's French John's Wharf, the John D. Baptiste family, the Caroline Street and Canal Street. If you all remember, Mr. Blanton Massey did a ton of research. Thank you, Mr. Massey. He did a whole lot of research, and he dug in the archives and found out a lot, which turned out to be African American history for the city of Fredericksburg. And from the Rising Sun Neighborhood Association, there was a request about possibility of a pocket. Well, let me not say possibility. There was a request for a pocket park and some signage in that area to recognize the story and to tell the story. And I met with Mr. Nelson last week about the sign, about signage and so on and so forth. So that's the staff member I met with. And usually I know that, I know this, the Memorials Commission had the issue. I'm not sure where it stands with the Memorials Commission in general. But usually, so the public knows, when the Memorials Commission has a topic, they usually come back to council with a recommendation. And through my knowledge, unless I missed something, I don't remember seeing a recommendation from Memorials Commission since they had been working on it. So I was under the impression that maybe they were still working out some of the details, or maybe what they wanted. So I wasn't clear on that. But what I would ask you on this one, Mr. Baruti, is if we can get in touch with the Memorials Commission and have them present a recommendation. That way we can make a motion on what we're going to do with signage and so on and so forth for the future. And also, I would like to ask that if you can get one of those packets or all that information that Mr. Massey presented. I know I have a copy somewhere. I get a lot of copies of everything. But if you can get an official copy from Mr. Massey once again, And that way we can have that documentation for the future. And then I'll branch off on another subject, same topic, real quick. On this right here, considering what we're working on as a city, to tell a more in-depth story about African American history in the city of Fredericksburg, what Mr. Massey did was absolutely what we needed to tell the story, well, a broader story. And I'm going to be a big advocate, until we get more done as a city. And the slave block conversation that we're having in the city, we're getting a lot of dialogue. I want folks to know that we're getting a lot of folks showing up to meetings, evening meetings and noon meetings. And what the city is doing is great. And my impression is the city is admitting, hey, for years we haven't been doing a good job telling the story. And now it's like working history is what y'all are witnessing right now. We're working on it right now. So this is just part of the process. And for some people, it's going to seem slow, but it's a major step to the bigger story of what Fredericksburg is going to tell. And like I said, I can't thank Mr. Massey enough for that. Now, that's a great mold to follow, what Mr. Massey did on any topic. It doesn't have to be African American history, but that much information is what we need. And without that type of documentation, we can assume stories and make up stories, and we can go past the location on Canal and Caroline, and we can make up anything without the proper documentation, and that's what history is all about. So, if we're going to claim to be the most historic city in America, that's just another step we have to take, and I'm glad that we're doing it. So, thank you for that, and that's my request. If we can get a request from the Memorials Commission or a recommendation along with the packet from Mr. Massey, that way it's on file. And I'll be happy to make that motion whenever it comes back in.
Yeah, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Barodi.
Happy to pursue more commentary from the Memorials Commission and the copy for the record. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Withers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know you've heard me say 100 times, probably till you've gotten tired of it, that I don't want to see Fredericksburg turned into Dumfries and Woodbridge and Northern Virginia. And unfortunately, I think the way our zoning is set up today, that we don't have a choice, that it can be turned in strictly by allowable rights. Multifamily in C8 zoning, in CT zoning, CH and commercial shopping center zoning is an allowable by right issue. A developer can come in and do whatever he wants. I think tonight's townhouse development is a perfect example of what can happen. I request that we have a work session or a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, the Planning Department, to sit down and study this issue of how we can better manage our commercial highway and commercial. I know the small area plans will take care of some of this, but we've only got one pretty much done after 4 years, so we've got 8 or 9 more to go. I'd like to see this issue addressed now, especially as it applies to subdivisions, the way they can be designed. Tonight's subdivision meets the requirements of open space. Unfortunately, most of that open space is an unusable area. I'd like to see us look at something that would require a certain amount of open space, at least some, to be used for usable open space. And screening should be required in these commercial zonings. You know, we're getting ready to spend, I guess, close to $100,000 to make these things happen now. And yet the development that's going on is the exact opposite of what we're trying to change. So until we get all this in place, I'd like to see us work together and for the good of the developer. I think these developers want to do what's right, but when they can do put the maximum amount of units in a place, they're going to do that. What it does is it drives the value of the land up. at the expense of living quality of life for me. That's my personal opinion. So I'm hopeful that this council will back a joint meeting to address these issues of development until we can get these small area plans in place. It may take some tweaking in our zoning. I'll ask that of the our city attorney. Is it something we can do to tweak these things? Of course, we'd have to go with the ordinance change. I understand that, but you got any suggestions?
Madam Mayor, the planning staff is working on revisions to Article 5 of the zoning ordinance. That's where your development regulations are. Those will be ready to come to you at your second meeting in September for initiation. So there is some work in the pipeline now that you'll be able to review and then decide if it meets council's needs, and if not, provide direction as to what you'd like to see.
Madam Mayor, is it coming to us in a work session prior to presentation?
Madam Mayor, we can certainly make that arrangement. Happy to do that.
Okay. And you know, I appreciate our staff's efforts, you know, but they are limited on what they can do based on what our ordinances allow. And, you know, I'm like Mary Catherine, I'm old Fredericksburg, and I guess the type of living that I like to see our residents enjoy is just, for me, it's different than maybe some others. And you know, I don't know how to handle this, but I hope we can at least discuss it and make our developments somewhat better. So, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Withers. Councilor Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to echo the Vice Mayor's request from a little bit of a different angle on this. You know, we have a tendency to focus on zoning and what we allow and don't allow in the zoning classification, yet we've really never sat down and discussed. And we talk about it and we say we do, but we really haven't. What is Fredericksburg going to be in 25 years? What are we looking for? Where do we want to put it? Where is it going to go? And then figure out what we want to do. Because since I've been on this council, we don't want to see townhouses, we don't want to see apartments, but we want more affordable housing and we want everybody able to live here. There's a little bit of a contradiction in that discussion. We talk about, we're concerned about density and screening residential from commercial. Yet the problem we have is we are a 19th century city where, frankly, there was no zoning when it was laid out, and we start talking about zoning issues that, frankly, this whole city, is almost one gigantic non-conforming use in a lot of ways and uses. It doesn't fit. Yet in all our discussions we're going through right now in the small area plans, which is driving all this conversation, what are we talking about? More density, mixed use, commercial, residential. And we frankly, we've been a bit schizophrenic in these discussions. Yeah, this is great in this case. No, we don't want this. We're worried about kids over here, then we're not. We want this, we want that. I do think we need, as a council, and this may be a big discussion at our retreat. I guess our retreat's coming up in the none too distant future. Let's have the first discussion. What are we looking for in Fredericksburg specifically? Not, you know, we have our, and I, you know, it's always driven me nuts when we have our retreats and we talk about these big, broad visions instead of really getting down and discussing what does that really translate, into with regards to future development. So I agree with the Vice Mayor that we do need to have this discussion, and I applaud him for bringing it up. And I do think the development community needs some direction from us, because up to this point, it's always been, oh, I like that, or I don't like that. Well, what do you want? Well, I just want something better. What does that even mean? We really need to have a meeting of the minds and a deep discussion on the future development of the city. And I applaud the Vice Mayor for bringing it up, and hope not only incorporating in our discussions when staff brings back the changes, but in our retreat in October to spend some time having a good conversation on what Fredericksburg's going to be in 25 years specifically. Because again, this is bad, but small area plans, we're talking about doing things that a lot of the council has over time said they don't like. Yet we're moving forward in this general direction, the new urbanism, you know, mixing it, making walkable, easy communities, which means higher density, mixed use. So I think it's time for us to kind of wrap our hands around this and have a good, solid discussion. Thank you.
Yeah,
Ms. Withers.
I agree with my friend, Mr. Kelly. I think you can have high density and mixed use and all of those things and still do it in a way that makes living more nearly pleasant for folks rather than just the bare minimum. Fredericksburg for me is not the bare minimum. It should be more than that, and I think it is for all of us. We want to have places and developments where people can enjoy their lives when they get home. So it's not an easy task in a small city like this, and especially a mixed-use city. And man, I lived in this town when we didn't, and Mary Catherine did, when we didn't have any zoning. So that wasn't that long ago, I guess back in the 60s, when they first passed zoning. So zoning may be the wrong word. Planning for me is an overall plan on what you want and how you want to get there. What we envision of the city looking like. So it's not an easy job. It's tough for our staff. It's tough for our developers in such a small area. So thank you very much for indulging me.
Councilor Fry.
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. I didn't think I was going to jump in on this one. And Mr. Withers, thank you for bringing your concerns about it, to the table. I just want to chime in and say, my opinion, with a yay or no and a red and a green button is absolutely what we have to stop a project if we don't want it. And that's just my take on it. If there's a special exception and we don't agree with the project, to me it goes with the vote. And that's just my take on it. I believe every project that's presented could be better. And I have to take a stab at this one. And I haven't followed up on Mr. Kelly's comment in a while, but I want to say this publicly. I know as a council we've been talking about affordable housing as well. I'm almost falling in this la-la land about this conversation, and I'm going to admit that I'm guilty of it, and it don't make sense to me for even entertaining half of it, because the reality of Fredericksburg is there, in a sense, I'm not saying it's cheap, there is affordable housing in the city of Fredericksburg. And what I'm starting to see now as the conversation has evolved is that folks just want affordable housing where they want to live at. And give you a prime example, there are a few houses that sold where I live at for $150,000. So I'm tired of hearing the conversation. Not saying I'm tired of it that I won't entertain it anymore, but I'm tired of hearing the conversation about affordable housing. Because really it's a slap in my face and just telling me I'm living in a low-income neighborhood. Because if Mayfield has homes and Bragg Hill has homes and they're priced at that rate, if you're not buying them, I don't know what you're looking for. Now, us as a city, it's up to us to look at projects that come in that can help folks afford, at minimum, those houses, because that's what that's the lower scale. So even when we get reports from all the realtors associations and whoever, I don't see them out on the corners. I don't see them at the apartment complexes trying to get folks qualified to buy a house. They have the resources to get the people in the houses. I don't see all of this. So that conversation, it kind of comes as an attack to council that, hey, you guys are not helping with affordable housing. And if it comes to the Realtors Association, whoever it might be, step out there and go to where if you go to apartment complex, everybody's renting. Stand outside in the cities right away and see how many folks you can get to buy a house for whatever price. So on affordability thing, I'm starting to have a problem with it about the comments about affordable housing, because just tell me you don't want to live in certain areas. Don't tell me we don't have affordable housing. If you want to live in the 22401 zip code, you want your kids to go to Jamesboro High School, and you want this and you want that and you want to catch the Fred, and if I'm just if whatever you can afford. I worked 2.5 jobs to buy my house 18 years ago. And I'm proud of it to this day. So I just want to nip that in the bud about the affordable housing comments that keep coming up. That's all I have on that one. But Mr. Withers, thank you for bringing your viewpoint on that. I just had to attack that. Mr. Kelly, that's not an attack to you, but it's just the comments keep coming up about affordable housing. And the more apartment complexes as a council that we do approve, that's less stable families that we are producing as a council. Because if you're renting an apartment for $1,200 or whatever it is, and every year it goes up $75, $100, or whatever the case, X amount of years you're paying $2,000 a month for an apartment, and you'll never be able to save up to buy a house or anything. So that's just my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Fry. Councilor Duffy?
Thank you, Mayor. I also am in support of Mr. Withers' comments and fears about development in Fredericksburg. I think we all are. I also want to lend support to Mr. Fry's comments about telling the story of Fredericksburg. And it's a key example of things that we needed to do, and appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the consent agenda?
Move consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
All right, please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
We have two sets of minutes before us, a public hearing of August 14th and a regular session of August 14th. Are any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move minutes as submitted.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 10A, it seems that PRTC requires appointments by resolution, so we have got to appoint Councilor Kelly and Councilor Graham to PRTC by resolution.
Madam Mayor, move resolution.
Now, do we have, excuse me, should the resolution say that Councilor Graham is an alternate, or are you both the?
No, it'd be an alternate because we
It
only
does
have
say
one
it.
vote on
We
it.
only have one vote, so it's Councilor Kelly and Councilor Graham is the alternate. Okay.
It's in the resolution.
It's in the resolution. Thank you, Ms. Lacy. I should have known you'd have it right.
Madam Mayor, I move a resolution appointing Matthew J. Kelly as a representative, Jason N. Graham as the alternate to the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
We have a vacancy on the Fredericksburg Clean and Green Commission.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move that we appoint Sarah Hurst to the Fredericksburg Clean and Green Commission.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
We have a member of the Regional Library Board that is eligible for reappointment.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move that we reappoint Cheryl Miller to the Central Rappahannock Regional Library.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
On the city manager's agenda, we have a resolution adopting the list of streets. Mr. King?
Madam Mayor, members of council, item 11A is a resolution adopting the list of streets to be included in our annual asphalt and pavement rehabilitation program. Your staff has prepared a list of streets to be included in this program, and that was submitted to council for review at the August 14th meeting. And there have been no comments or changes made to the list. So the list that is before you this evening for adoption is the same list of streets. Those streets are to be funded through a combination of local funds and VDOT funds. And upon the adoption of the list of streets, your staff will get working towards preparing the bid documents for this work, and plan to advertise this as soon as possible, and anticipate coming back to you all probably in late October sometime or early November for a contract award. And with that, I'll open it to any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Mr. King?
Madam Mayor, I'll move a resolution adopting the list of streets to be improved during the fiscal year 2019 asphalt rehabilitation program.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, Mr. King. Item 11B is a first read to amend our budget. Ms. Jett?
Good evening. As part of the annual process for preparing for the audit, City Council is asked to make adjustments to the budget at the close of fiscal year. And staff recommends approval of the attached resolution on first reading. The attached resolution appropriates a total of $247,000, and of this total, 225 is related to activity in the school grants fund. It's a reimbursement for activities related to the Medicaid and E-rate program. There are no local funds involved in that appropriation. There's also some activity related to the debt service fund in the amount of $6,860 and $14,200 related to the Riparian Land Stewardship Fund. These funds will be made available from the use of contingency in the general fund. The Riparian Lands Fund, because of interest rates being so low, the expenses of the fund are not being met through interest earnings on the endowment. At the end of the year, by using approximately $15,400 in contingency, the balance at the close of FY 2018 will be $209,425. And the use of this contingency does not increase the appropriation of the general fund. And the final item related to this cleanup resolution is increasing the appropriations by recognizing revenues received in the Special Welfare Revenue Fund. The city serves as a fiscal agent for this program, which is administered by the Department of Social Services, and that increase will be approximately $1,100. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Madam Mayor, I move first read amendment fiscal year 2018 budget for final adjustments.
Second.
Councilor Duffy?
Mayor, I'm not sure if it's required, but since I do work for the schools, I'd like to make a disclosure that I am assistant principal at James Monroe High School, and I can participate in these matters fairly and in the public interest.
Thank you. Councilor Fry?
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. Also read mine. My spouse is an employee of the Fredericksburg Public School System. I'm able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, motion's been made and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Mayor. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Baruti, I'll call on you for your update.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Highlight the fact that obviously we just had a recent good, robust conversation on 90% plans for the Riverfront Park. Do appreciate council making time for that special meeting. We're also been directed by council to increase our efforts to seek community input. So we have on our website a place for folks to weigh in on the various aspects of the Riverfront Park. So we do encourage folks to participate by getting on our website and telling us what they think about the Riverfront Park. We will receive comments. Actually, we're going to extend this. It says September 5th, but we'll extend it another week. What we'd like to do is come back to council on September 25th. I had earlier suggested we'd come back on September 11th, but issues are not yet fully resolved. So we'd like to come back to council for a more robust conversation on Riverfront Park on September 25th. So we will extend the comment period till September 12th. So again, we do encourage the public to participate by letting us know what's on their minds. Also highlight the fact that Potomac Nationals team owners will be here in our community. They're going to hold a community meeting. We will welcome them on September 5th at 7 p.m. at the Dorothy Hart Community Center located at 408 Canal Street. So again, we do want public to come out and hear directly from the ownership about their plans for a stadium build-out in the city of Fredericksburg. So please join us for that conversation. I'll also highlight that the planning department is working on small area 7, Area 7, which is downtown. Please join them for a kickoff meeting on September 11th at 7:30 p.m. at the Planters Bank Building at 1001 Princess Anne Street. So again, September 11th at 7:30 p.m. Please be with our planning department as they discuss Area 7, Small Area Plan 7. I'll also thank Mr. Fry and the police department and the school systems, the parks department for another successful Midnight Madness summer. So again, that program has concluded, but again, with great success. So we do appreciate everybody putting their efforts together to make that happen. I will lastly thank the Fire Department for their passing of their recent biennial agency inspection. They were reviewed by the Virginia Department of Health Office of Emergency Medical Services, and they passed with flying colors on all of our apparatus and requirements for licensing. So we do appreciate their good, hard work to keep us safe in the community. With that, Madam Mayor, I'll also highlight that your calendar is before you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Madam Mayor, may I ask for a clarification on the September 5th meeting on the baseball project? My understanding is that that is an event that is hosted by the club, and it is for dialogue between the club and the community. And just to be clear, that is, as I understand it, that is not a city council public hearing or public input session. That is the club's meeting.
Madam Mayor, to the city attorney's question, yes, that is correct. We have worked to facilitate the meeting. It is the ownership's meeting. They will be conducting a public information session, and happy to take questions directly from the public at that opportunity. That's correct.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. We may attend, but it is not a council meeting. Mm-hmm.
No, you can all attend,
All
you
right.
just can't be together.
Well, so, if there is nothing more to be brought before this body tonight, we are adjourned. And I think it might have made the 6th.